Welcome, everyone. And hello, Robert. How are you?
Hi, Joe.
So this is episode 124 of LunarCrush Live. We do a weekly live stream at LunarCrush, John and I. Today it's just me, but normally we do it virtually. So today we're here IRL, which it means in real life, which the fact that I had to explain that means that I'm an old millennial and that's not cool anymore. But I have your bio here, and normally I don't read off a bio, but there were like a lot of words on here that I don't know if I can pronounce, so I was going to go for it. So Robert serves as CEO and chairman of Crown Sterling and is a longtime businessman and entrepreneur with over 25 years of experience in founding and leading companies in healthcare, blockchain, clean tech, encryption, advanced cybernetics, and fintech industries. Holder of over 50 patents. His paper, Accurate and Infinite Prime Number Prediction from Novel Quasi-Prime Analytical Methodology and a Novel Geometric Model of Natural Spirals Based on Right Triangle Polygonal Modular Formations. How am I doing?
You're doing great.
Serves as the foundation for the team's advancement of the popular and proven scalable elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman encryption software module by replacing vulnerable prime number private keys with non-repetitive irrational numbers derived from private keys, random private keys, and then further developed a first-of-its-kind scalable use one-time pad encryption, the only encryption you cannot crack. I know that from you. He's concurrently chairman and manager of Strathspey Crown. He's also author of the best-selling book, Philomath?
Philomath.
Philomath.
Actually, it could be pronounced that way, too, if you're Italian.
I'm Italian.
There you go.
The geometric unification of science and art through number. You have your Bachelor of Arts from BYU, Masters of Business Administration, MBA from Thunderbird. Robert, welcome to the show, my man.
Thank you. Great to be here.
That was awesome. So I want to start very quickly here. Why are you sailing up and down the Nile River every year, and why are you sleeping nights in the pyramids?
That's a great question. I think everyone should have hobbies, right?
Yeah.
My hobby became something a lot more than a hobby. And I love Egyptology. I've always been into Egyptology. But I went in 2017 and something clicked and it really changed me in a major way. And then I went back again in 2018 and I went into the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid. And I've spent 11 nights inside the Great Pyramid now. 11 nights. They actually gave me a key to the pyramid. I actually have a key. It's like a concierge key to the pyramid. And while I was there, you don't really sleep in the pyramid much, right? You kind of stay awake, but you're like looking around at things, and I'm looking for interesting things in the room. And I looked down at the rim of the sarcophagus in the King's Chamber. It's the only piece of furniture inside the pyramid, in the most studied building on the planet, in the oldest, and highest standing building of that height on the planet as well. And I know that there's not supposed to be any writing in the pyramid. And I look down at the rim of the sarcophagus and I see Alpha Omega pressed into the rose granite, but you can only see it from one angle of light. And I brought in the Egyptologists and I said, hey guys, what is this? And they're like, did you make this? And I'm like, no. Yeah, I chipped it out just now. This is made of dolerite, rose granite. If I even took one hammer and chiseled to it, the whole thing would crack. It's so brittle. And they realized that it's much older, much, much older. And so I got to discover the first writing that was not graffiti inside the Great Pyramid.
Wow.
And that has led to a whole TV show and everything around this. So it's a lot more than just a hobby now. I have a TV show about this story. And it takes us through many, many discoveries and connects back to Leonardo da Vinci and Albrecht Dürer and Shakespeare. And all of this information about the Great Pyramid was encrypted in their writings, in the sonnets and the plays, as well as in the artwork of da Vinci himself.
And so you're looking for some of these encryptions on the wall, but what are you truly looking for? You're not looking for Alpha Omega. What are you actually looking for?
So, what I think, I felt like my whole life that, we do all these things. I remember seeing Steve Jobs give a speech at Stanford in 2005. And he didn't realize until much later in his life why he dropped out of college at Reed College and went off to learn typesetting, right? So when he learned this typesetting, he didn't know how that would connect to laser printers later on. And if you remember back, some of us probably do remember, some of us don't, but we used to have these printers that just had bitmapped images on them. They were terrible, absolutely terrible. And that was a game changer when laser printers came out and you could see the serifs on the letters. Right? And that was because Steve Jobs had gone to this typesetting school. I felt like my whole life had sort of led up. All the things I've done in business, all the things I've done in travel around the world. I've lived in, I've visited more than 140 countries. I've lived in 9 countries. I've learned eight languages. And I felt like there was something that I needed to learn about the ultimate encryption, which I believe the ultimate encryption for all of us is learning and remembering who we are. And I felt like I was on my own hero's journey. I feel every one of us is. And I had something to uncover, to learn about myself through this process. And it was a spiritual journey, just like Joseph Campbell's sort of hero's journey for myself. And it was the most powerful experience I've ever had. So if you've never been to Egypt, I highly, highly recommend it. It's life-changing. And the greatest encryption of all is the one of who we are ourselves.
It's beautiful. And so I want to know a little bit about where did that kind of switch happen? Where were you? Like, tell us a little bit about your career and kind of what led you to encryption, which then probably led you kind of to cryptocurrency as well.
I spent most of my career in healthcare. I lived overseas and I was running foreign subsidiaries. I started out as an entrepreneur and I had a successful sale when I was 21 years old. So I was like, was I just lucky? I didn't feel like I could find my ass with both hands, right? So I'm like, what the hell? I need to go work for large companies. And I knew enough to know that companies go through different stages of their development and they require different leaders and different leadership types. So I wanted to learn all the different leadership types necessary for a small entrepreneurial venture to a mid-sized company to a very large corporation, and how to manage and lead in those situations. How to, companies face different challenges. Early on, it's all about capital raising, right? Later, as you get into large corporations, it's all about earnings per share growth. And that mentality shift is not something that usually one person can cross the transom of. Very difficult. So I decided to go work for mid-sized companies, large companies, very small companies as well. And I had all of those experiences. I think I was the youngest public company CEO of a healthcare company when I was 32 years old. And so I've been a CEO for a long time. I became president of Allergan Medical. I launched Juvederm, Botox, Lap-Band, Latisse. It was a fun thing to do because it was taking products that were not known and they were provided through third parties like doctors, but making them household names. And so I got very excited about that specific niche in the market. I did the same thing with LASIK, did the same thing as well with cataract surgery, with crystal lens. And I've had some really amazing consumer/medical technology products. But in 2011, I left Bausch & Lomb, and because I left Allergan, went to Bausch & Lomb, I wanted to learn the secret sauce of private equity. After about 2 years of doing it, I was like, the secret is there's no sauce, there's only debt. That is the secret sauce of private equity. Buy low, sell high, wait for the sector rotations, and try to cut expenses as much as possible. That's the game. And then when the sector rotates back up, then you sell. So I thought that's not really creation of alpha. And I determined that the only way to create true alpha is not through synergizing, by making acquisitions and firing a lot of people. I just don't believe in that. If there's no synergy at the customer level, there's no synergy. That's what I determined. I've led many, many major, large acquisitions. And I can tell you the vast majority have not succeeded. And it's because you lose the value when your thesis is to cut costs, and you can't cut your way from a cost perspective to success. It's very difficult. You need to create something new at the customer level. So I founded a company, Strathspey, 10 years ago. Now we have 17 companies in that portfolio, 11 of which I founded. And, we're a disruptor in the different sectors we go into. In fintech, we're the number 2 healthcare lender in the United States right now, with Alphion Credit, which you may have seen in doctors' offices and stuff. I know your friend is one of our providers. We have 7,000 retail sites around the country. And also we have 2 neurotoxin companies. One went public called Evolus. So I've had the opportunity to take several companies now public that I founded, which is like crazy. I never thought that would happen. And it's just been a great journey. We have some clean tech companies as well. I'm going to go visit one on Friday in Colorado in Boulder. And it's called Thrival Tech that uses plasma reformation to put on combustion engines to make them 0% emissions. It's really fascinating. So it's fun stuff. I get to be in all these different areas. But probably when I went to Egypt in 2018 and I discovered the Alpha Omega, about a week later, I was working in number theory because that's one of the things I've done as well as a hobby. and I discovered a prime number pattern and published it at Cornell. And then that brought me right into cryptography, because there's not supposed to be a pattern in prime numbers. And we found a pattern on mod 24 analysis that really is a flattened form of what's called a cube octahedron in geometry. The 24 edges of a cube
Everyone here
octahedron.
knows what that is, right?
Yeah. So it's a flattened form, Nicosi tetragon, and we could use it to predict prime numbers infinitely.
Okay.
And my friends in computer science were like, dude, this could cause a problem for factorization, which is the foundational basis of elliptic curves and the foundational basis also of RSA encryption types. And so then we also established that there's a right triangular relationship for all prime factorization. And we published these papers. You could find them. We then applied the same concepts to novel polygonal spirals that are embedded within the exact pitches of spiral galaxies, that they're not based on the Euler number. They're actually based rather on polygons. So that thrust me right into cryptography and the realization that we needed a new cryptographic platform to deal with not only quantum computing, but also geometric attack.
Okay, so I know you've got a book, and there's a lot of that in there, and
Yes, it's all in Philomath. Philomath. It's on Amazon.
I want to go back and kind of just linger a little bit on, maybe some lessons learned, though, from all of the companies and everything you started. You said you were 21 in that first business. What's some of the advice maybe to the younger entrepreneurs out there who are thinking, I don't want to take the leap. I have benefits at this company, or I have this, my parents are going to say this, or what's going on. As someone that's taken a lot of risk and it's been successful, though, maybe you can give a little advice to some of the younger entrepreneurs out there that are thinking, I don't know if I want to go try something new.
I think if there's one thing that we could all do, it doesn't matter what age you are, we all suffer from negative self-narratives, right? Our own thoughts is what hold us back from our ultimate success. It's like we're this rose that wants to blossom, but we keep pulling ourselves back. And it's easy for us to blame others, right? We could say, oh, it was the government or some tax regulation or something that kept us from being successful. The market crashed, whatever it is. It doesn't matter. But the thing that's actually destroyed more ideas, entrepreneurs' dreams, is self-doubt. So self-doubt, if you could take that negative narrative and just put it aside, like literally put it aside and replace it with, every time you think like that, is say to yourself, I am so grateful to be doing what I'm doing right now. So replace the fear, the anxiety, the FUD, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt with gratitude. When you do that, it will raise your own vibration, the way you think, the way you feel, and you will tap into another source of not only energy for yourself, but also to your genius. Because we all have genius within us. It was Walter Russell that said, mediocrity is self-inflicted and genius is self-bestowed. And I had the opportunity to speak at Walters University a few weeks ago in Virginia in a 3-hour lecture, which I was invited for, and they let me sleep in his house and in his room and everything. It was really a cool experience. Wow. And for those of you that have never heard of Walter Russell, he was like a Leonardo da Vinci of the 20th century, an amazing person that had an incredible cosmology that I think is actually, Nikola Tesla spoke of it because they were partners. Nikola Tesla said, you need to hide away your work for 1,000 years because the world's not ready for it. And that's Tesla. So that tells you a lot. But I really believe it's about overcoming your fear, uncertainty, and doubt in your own mind. And if that's all you do, it will make a meaningful impact on your level of success and self-actualization.
And what about finding others around you to kind of carry that dream with you, right? Like a single founder is a very difficult person to be. So can you talk a little bit about how you kind of found some of the partners along the way that have supported you and you've supported them? My partner in Strathspey has been my same partner. He was my banker for 10 years. And he's been my partner for 10 years. So we've stayed together, right? We're like a married couple now. It's like, dude, it's like we're going to have to die, right? It's like we're not going to separate. And I think the reason is, and we've had ups and downs too. We've not always agreed on things. But having that debate and knowing that it always comes from a place of caring and love and having that relationship, I just don't believe in this thing where you can't be friends with people you work with. I find that to be absolutely untrue. You can. It just takes more vigilance to ensure that you don't have misunderstandings, because those misunderstandings can go to negative self-narratives, and then that starts to self-sabotage situations. And we don't realize that what we think
becomes what we speak, and what we speak becomes what we do, and what we feel becomes the outside world around us. Literally, it's like a universe that we call it, but actually I see it more like a U-inverse. What you're feeling on the inside becomes the world around you, and we all experience it, and then everything we're judging becomes what we are attracting. So if we start thinking a little differently and saying, you know, I need to listen to my partner because he's bringing a different facet, not fact. So that was a big shift for me because I had to learn that a lot of the things that I thought were facts in life were actually facets of a larger prism of a whole truth. So being able to step out of yourself and say, you know what, I want to empathize and see the world as he sees the world was one of the most powerful things for both of our relationship. But I'll say this, that it wasn't always perfect. We had some other partners early on that didn't share that frequency of vibration, didn't share that level of positivity, didn't share this notion of getting rid of negative self-narrative. And when you identify it, you try, but remember, you gotta, and I suffered from this early in my career, I used to think I could change people. You can't change people. You can only change yourself, and you do that by being the change you want to see in the world. You can't change other people. They have to choose to change if they want to change. Mm-hmm. And if they're not evolving with you also, that's a challenge as well, because you can even have the best of relationships where people are at a certain level, and one is on the path of evolution, the other one's not. And so that guy's got to hold up a little bit and pull him along the way and try his best to keep him there. Luckily, we've been able to do that. But you got to get rid of the people that become energy vampires in your life.
And so it sounds like just a high amount of communication. Right?
Totally.
And so if you're communicating, because kind of what you can come up with in your head, you know, if you don't have the opinion of someone else, is probably way crazier than what they're actually thinking, right? And so how do you guys, what about tactically with, you know, your kind of core team? Are you guys talking every week? Is it
Yeah.
like get specific around like, hey, we meet every Friday at 7, we do this for an hour. Like, how do you think tactically about that?
Well, each of the teams, they're like the dev team, for example, on Crown Sterling, you know, they have daily stand-up meetings in the morning. I get an update of what's happening in those stand-up meetings, but we have every 2 weeks like a staff meeting, but I'm in constant contact with each of the people that are my direct reports, right? And luckily we have 17 companies, but we also have 15 CEOs. So I only have to be CEO of 2 of the companies right now. One of them being Crown Sterling, the other one being Cyber, which is our, basically Web3 intraocular lens technology that does everything that your iPhone does. And it has a really cool cyberverse game embedded within it too. It's like game changing. Has this tiny little camera. This thing sits inside your eye, 6 millimeters in diameter. The camera is only 300 microns in diameter. It can record your whole life. And it's the same type of lens that goes in your eye for cataract surgery. And we patented all of this stuff about 8 years ago.
Sounds like the Black Mirror episode.
It is. You know what? That's where this is going, right? It's definitely going to go there. We wanted to create, though, a game within that environment as well that we're calling a category of spiritual life simulation, which is very exciting as well. But I'm CEO of that company because it requires still a lot of innovation and everything. And then also with Crown Sterling. And Crown Sterling has an app that's super cool. It's the first decentralized, truly quantum resistant, one-time pad backed, right? Messaging app that's soon going to be available to everybody. I'm using it right now. It's pretty freaking cool.
Can you explain one-time pad? You've explained it to me a couple of times, and it's been around for a long time. It's kind of like the best encryption that's possible, unbreakable, but it's been around forever. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the history of that and what one-time pad is.
So basically what one-time pad is, if you guys have ever seen the movie Imitation Game, did you watch that movie?
Oh, yeah.
It was about Alan Turing. It was really interesting about how they cracked the Enigma code. Well, the reason why they cracked the code was because the Germans kept using the same key over and over again. The first several characters were the same key over and over again. And so they were able to decipher from that how to crack it. But otherwise, if they hadn't used the same key over and over again, if they truly used it only once, then it would be impossible to crack. And everybody knows this in cryptography. But to deliver this in a practical fashion is really damn hard. Like really hard. Because in order to have a successful one-time pad, each character of your message text has to be individually encrypted. So you're going to have really long keys. You have a gigabyte file, you have to have a gigabyte long key. This is why you can't crack it. And by the way, each character, because it's individually encrypted, means that even if you crack one character, you're no more likely to crack the next, right? So actually the strength of the encryption grows with the length of the message. But how do you issue such a long key? How do you store such a long key? How do you efficiently do this on blockchain? Very, very difficult stuff to overcome. We had to come up with a new mathematical compression of keys, which we did. And we're able to compress those keys in a lossless, entirely lossless, proven lossless fashion, which allows one-time pad now to be usable on blockchain. So the way that we ensure that we never use a key over and over again is we have a machine learning algorithm that goes into the random number generator that basically uses something in mathematics called a gradient descent function, which will never kick out the same key twice. If you've seen how Google has these like AIs that basically write music, and they're writing different music every single second. It's an entirely different song, right? It's never the same twice. That's using gradient descent. And so we embedded that into our machine learning algorithm that basically has an impact on random number generation at the end of it, and still been able to achieve all the uniform distribution metrics required. We actually have the highest level of uniform distribution, which is a measurement of randomness. We have the highest level of randomness right now.
And you were showing me last night on your phone the app, like some of the chat. So how exactly does that technology make it into that app specifically?
So one-time pad is the encryption that backs all of this app, right? And eventually, I see it, you saw Kanye West just bought Parler, right? Mm-hmm. I see it as eventually, with all the risk of censorship that's happening in society, cancel culture, all the stuff that's going on, I believe there needs to be a platform that allows people to be able to have social discourse and debate and do it in a fashion that is not censored by society. Now, obviously, that goes down lots of rabbit holes. But I've grown up believing in the necessity of free speech to maintain a successful democracy. The right to assemble is a critical aspect. It's not a religious right. It's a right of assembly that should be for all of society in general. And I just don't like this heavy-handed approach that big tech is taking. So what we did is we wanted to create a platform that overcomes the problem that, like WhatsApp has. So let's say WhatsApp gets a subpoena from the government. Right? If they get a subpoena, they will access your account, go into your account, and be able to then provide that to the government. They have no choice but to do that, right? This is the law. This is because it's all on their servers, and it's all under their control. But let's say, you know the difference between Wix and WordPress, right?
Yep.
WordPress, I could host it on my own server. Wix is kind of like, I got to go with their own system, right? And it's cookie cutter, it's easy to put together, it's easy to put in place. But I'm limited as to what I can do. But on WordPress is just providing a software. They're not going to be held responsible. Wix could be for what's written on those sites, right? And this is where government's going right now. I'm very active in government affairs. My head of government affairs is running for Congress right now in a hotly contested seat in Orange County. His name is Scott Baugh. And if he wins, he'll end up being on the crypto caucus, I'm quite sure, because we've talked about it a lot, and this is very well known that he knows a lot about this space as well. So basically, the way I see it is that the only way to overcome this government overreach into each of these individual, sort of like messaging apps, et cetera, which, by the way, WhatsApp has $5 billion in sales. How do they get $5 billion in sales every year and growing fast? How do they do it? I'm not paying for it. There's no advertising on it. They're scraping your data. That's how they're doing it, right? They're selling your data. So there's an app now that Scott gave me, actually. I didn't know about it. And this app has every single person in the United States listed on it of adult age, of voting age. I've seen this app. There are 56 pages just on me. 56 pages. Every single way that I would vote, including on abortion, on whether I perceive China as a hawk, right, technically, do I see them as a threat, do I not see them as a threat, are broken down line by line in degrees. And I'm telling you, it was crazy accurate what I saw.
Is this why I'm getting all those text messages on who to vote for?
Yes. So the candidates now, they buy it, they have access to this app, and it's all scraped from our messaging apps and social media usage. And they go to meet you, and they know what to tell you so that you'll vote for them. Do you guys know this? This exists right now.
A couple head nods out there, I see.
Yeah, this exists right now, and it's so dystopian. So imagine we go into a world where, like COVID was kind of freaky, right? I mean, let's be real. We go into a world where a regime gets control, like in Gilead, right? You've seen Handmaid's Tale. And all of a sudden, they're like, oh, this house is a dissident household. They actually have that. You've got all your addresses on there, all your data. They know your position on everything. Hello. Not the world I want to live in or I want my children to grow up in. So what we had to do was to decentralize it all. Because once it's decentralized, the government can't subpoena it. It's not on one server. That's the thing. It's sharded across an entire decentralized network, and so are the keys. So we don't even have access to it.
Yeah. So slight overreach, and we're at a cryptocurrency conference, so slight home crowd here, I would say, on some of these issues. But how do we slowly get there over time, right? I think when Bitcoin kind of came out, and it's been over 10 years now. Even 10 years ago, people were like, the dollar's going to zero. Money printing is happening. It just keeps happening. It keeps happening. Here we are 10 years later. There's 10,000 different cryptocurrencies. NFTs didn't even exist in the same way that they did before. How does it look over the next 10 years? You don't have a crystal ball, but maybe just talk a little bit about, sure, you want to snap your fingers and everyone has kind of autonomy over everything. We're all our own API, everything works great, but how do you kind of get there, right? Like with some of the innovations and things that you're working on, obviously you're passionate about change, change in government, sovereignty, the sovereign individual, right? So it's like, how do we slowly kind of get there in the correct way that's not going to shock everyone?
First of all, I like to go to history because history is usually the best predictor of the future. Right? And if you go back into 1776, that was when we went from a sovereign leader, which was a king, a monarchy, right, George III, to a sovereign government. About 50 years ago, we transitioned from sovereign government to sovereign corporation. And it happened that long ago. Shocking, right? And this is when lobbying became such a powerful aspect. The military-industrial complex, all this stuff started coming up. I just got invited to speak at the United Nations where I stood up and said, guys, our government's corrupt. Nobody disagreed. Freaky. Like, I was laughing. I'm like, oh, everyone's going to, disagree. Like, no one did. That was really weird for me. But also telling. The transition we're now making is from corporate as sovereign to individual as sovereign. And that's what I believe blockchain actually provides as a promise. And having a new voting mechanism, et cetera, that could potentially augment how we have representative democracy right now. Because do we really need the degree of representative democracy that we have? And look at all the redundancy we have across it, right? Why do we have different DMVs in every single state? Right? Does that really make a whole lot of sense? Right? I lived in Germany. We didn't have that in Germany. Right? We have so many taxes. The tax that is paid in the state of California is, if you make $10 million, it is 52% taxed. The redundancy is basically starting to cave in on itself. And I think that's a big, big issue because it's not actually leading to better infrastructure. Just go to LAX. Hello. That airport has been under construction now for at least the last 20 years. Every day I go there, it's like a new section is under construction. It's terrible. So the point I'm making is the way we transition to this, I think, is we have to first understand that we are sovereign, and that sovereignty is not only over our own bodies and our own person, but it has to also include our digital lives. Because a digital life has become so important. I mean, now I just went to this NFT and Metaverse conference where they were showing all the new deep fake technology. They actually came to me and they said, we'd like to make an avatar for you on your website so you could do a Q&A on anything and your grandchildren can watch it. And it will look just like you. It will answer questions just like you would answer questions. A deep fake of me, right? We've all seen the ones of Tom Cruise showing up on Instagram and everything. Yeah. We've got to be able to get control of who we are. It's a fundamental aspect of being human. And it goes right back to, we hold these truths to be self-evident. That all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. It's fine when there's true consent. That's how it has to work, because government works for us, not the other way around. And I fundamentally believe it has to start with us understanding our own rights, understanding that our data is our own intangible personal property, that we own it as the original producer of that data, and we have to lay claim to that. And we did that with the Bill of Rights around data. And I feel very, very strongly that it starts with education and awareness. And once we have that, then we can start moving more and more towards these decentralized things. But this morning I posted on my Instagram a little meme that said, sometimes being crazy is just being right too soon. Sometimes being crazy is just being right too soon. And I think that's what we're dealing with right now. So if you're asking me about the next 10 years, what is going to happen? I believe that there will be a dislocation with the dollar. I think it's obvious. With the first relief package that came out on COVID that was basically shoved into that bill was the Federal Reserve's right to come out with their own digital currency that would not be subject to the same approaches that we've seen with monetary policy, which has been this constant Keynesian type philosophy, which is, look, let's smooth out all of the economic cycles that we see by using monetary policy and basically injecting liquidity into society. But they did it in a way this time that was almost as if they tend to tank it. Do you know that 35% of all US dollars on planet Earth right now were created in the last 2.5 years?
I do know that.
So is it any surprise we've got a massive inflation issue going on right now, actually stagflation issue?
Potentially, yeah. So I do want to, I think no one would disagree with you about, data sovereignty, right? Owning your own data, having access to that. And it might not even necessarily be having a government take that data. It might just be other nefarious actors out there trying to steal your information.
Oh, yeah.
But there's just to kind of play devil's advocate on the tax piece a little bit. If someone said, "Hey, you made $10 million, you got to keep 5, and 5 goes to LAX to make it better," right? Maybe talk a little bit about.
I would actually be okay with that, right? It's like, do something with my money. But when you're seeing that very little is being done and all I'm getting is checks back in the mail, that actually pissed me off even more than paying the tax.
Right. Do you think, and I know we're getting
I get checks recently, and I'm like, what do I get this check for? Why am I getting a check from the government? It's not a refund on taxes.
Can you send it back? Maybe you send it back to them.
Well, I just don't cash it. But it's like, what the hell is this? It makes no sense.
When you think about innovation, and you think about, there's 400 or 500 people making decisions, for 330 million, right? And have we outgrown the governance too quickly? We're not adapting, and maybe people are thinking, blockchain and cryptocurrency. We finally kind of have this outlet, this way for everyone to have a say, but we're not quite there yet, right? Like there's still a lot that has to change. And I was listening. I only made it 3 hours into the 8-hour Balaji podcast with Lex Friedman, but there's a lot there around sovereignty, about what about things like land, right? What about, like, we're still all physical beings, we're still all out there. We're not all just going to live in the metaverse in perpetuity. Even if I have the Ready Player One, I could feel whatever on my body. We're not there. We're not close, right? So how do we kind of bridge that gap, though, right? How do you bridge that gap and bring the rest of folks in? Because I would say there's probably a lot of people out there that are like, man, go pay your taxes. Like, I need better roads, but you're saying it's not happening. How do we make that impact?
I think the big challenge we have right now is something that's embedded in the way the Founding Fathers set up. I mean, it was necessary at the time. In 1776, it was absolutely necessary to have a representative democracy, the way that we set it up. And with all the redundancy and features built in within it, it made sense. Because it took a long time to communicate with all of the constituency. So how do you do it? You have to do it through layers. And remember, the Founding Fathers wanted to make it only the educated people that were landowners would even be possible as representatives, right? It's more of like an old school, Grecian Senate kind of a model, which, it's funny, all the different styles of government that can possibly exist until technology intercedes are all found in Plato's Republic. If you've never read Plato's Republic, it's kind of mind-boggling because you look at it and go, oh my gosh, it's all laid out here, the exact cycle that everyone goes through without even realizing that they're going through it. So I think that the first way that we have to be able to get people to understand this is, again, coming back to who am I and what are my needs, and do we really need the same type of representative level of agency, because that's what it introduces. What is happening in the world right now? The world has changed from a society that has been rewarding middlemen, think about it, Like from a macro perspective, I look at artists today. Artists, in the 20th century made little money unless they were crazy successful. Now my artist friends actually made a lot of money in the last few years, right? NFTs have really changed that. Society is starting to reward creativity and artistry in different ways that it never has before. So this term starving artist is not the way that it used to be, right? And it's because what society is starting to reward is the actual original producer of things, the content. We even have people now that claim their careers as content-tainment. I create content on social media. That's a job now. I want to be a social media influencer. That's a job. It wasn't a job when I was growing up. So when you think about this, do we really need all of this agency layered on top of us? Because the agency introduces the potentiality for corruption. And I think that's where blockchain can actually come in. I'm not saying that we reduce and get rid of all government. I don't believe that. I think that I'm not an anarchist at all. I just believe that there's ways now to address voting mechanisms. I believe there's ways we should have all voting registries on blockchain. Let's be real. And it should all be one-time pad encrypted because it cannot be, it's sort of unfuckwithable, right? And it's a hashtag unfuckwithable type thing. And I believe it should be that way. And I think that a lot of the referendum type stuff that we have right now could also be administered in a similar fashion. So can we reduce the level of redundancy and the level of agency, which is what introduces a lot of the corruption? Yes, I think the answer to that question is yes, but it's going to take another Continental Congress. And I think it's going to require people to come together and say, look, let's put aside our own self-interest. Let's recognize that the hurt of any man is the hurt of all men. Let's recognize that the benefit of any man is the benefit of all as well when we work together. And we can actually find win-win solutions to these things. It doesn't all have to be a zero-sum game.
You said a lot of smart things here, but I think the one thing I'm jealous of is that I didn't come up with unfuckwithable. That's really good. But so I want to take just a step back and talk a little bit about, you said 17 companies, right? And you're the CEO of 2 of them right now. You've kind of launched those. It sounds like you've got kind of this incubation and then kind of pull in a management and a team there. How do you know the inflection point? What is the product market fit for the products or services or the technology? Maybe if it's hardware, it's a little bit earlier, right? They go that you potentially bring in a CEO, that person maybe gets a large equity cut of what's going on. They go raise capital for it. How does that process work? Because that's kind of like, it's a little interesting there. It's like entrepreneur in residence, but it's inverted a little bit, because you're bringing other folks in to run it. How does that, because it sounds like that's the action you're trying to take, right? You're trying to create innovation through these 15 to 17 companies, and you're probably going to do a lot more.
And we have many VC partners. Right? So there are different stages when a company is getting to that level of maturity of productization. So it's usually beyond the productization stage. It's kind of well into I would say it's at the Series C, D range.
Okay,
we'll fund it all.
Yeah.
That's pretty late. Yeah. We'll fund it all up until that stage, right? And usually when we do other investments of companies that are outside of us as well, and we have done, we're investing at kind of that stage that we don't play in. Interestingly, because we see a technology, we think it has a synergy or something associated with it. So what we try to do is bring in, we know that there's a different type of rigor. You need audited financials. That's when you bring in Ernst & Young or Price Waterhouse, right? You're going to start bringing in some major advisors. So the expense level starts to really rise. And if you want to take outside investors, you've got to be a C Corp. You can't have an LLC structure anymore. Right? And you're going to have to deal with, how do I deal with the possible inequities that arise with things like participative preferred stock offerings, right? Which then create these kind of conflicts that can show up, right? And you end up creating this conflict of interest between the common holders and the preferred holders. And then where does debt get rolled into that also? So it's a level of sophistication as well as complexity that becomes kind of obvious as to where the business is. Because as soon as you get third parties who want to start making investments, that's about the time, because they're interested then when it's like, okay, you're beyond a proof of concept, you're in revenue stage, or maybe very early revenue stage if it's a big idea, right? Or if it's a marketplace like you've created. You've created kind of a latent marketplace, right, in your app, right, with LunarCrush, which I think is fabulous. And that's why it's going to garner a lot of attention, because you're amassing, right, this group of community. And that community type model allows you to not have to be in revenue too early, right? It allows you to kind of hold back a little bit. So what we do is we want to interject at the right time the level of complexity, the rigor, right? And I know how to run companies with that tens of thousands of employees. And so I know, okay, this is the kind of CEO we need for this job. And if we're in a sector that we're not really normally in, then we go and get the top experts in those fields. We find a way to find the top experts. So we have a company also called Theon Technology, which does cryptography and compression. It's the B2B side of what we do at Crown Sterling. So we're doing the blockchain side. And I went and hired the whole team that was responsible for Akamai, compression and at Dell EMC. And basically we got that whole team, and they're running that business, and they're super good at what they do. And I get out of their way. I'm a board member. I stay on the board. I try not to be chairman. When the company goes public, I don't want to even be on the board. My partner will often be on the board. He may stay as chairman of the board or something, but I have to try to keep myself free from the types of things that are more the oversight aspects.
So you're almost letting the market decide a little bit when it's time to say, hey, this project has achieved some level of product market fit. It's now time to go rally an executive team around there. And so how do you actually structure that executive team? Like if you bring in a CEO or bring in a CFO, a team that's there, I mean, are you holding a certain amount of equity? Do you become now an investor? Because I think
yes,
with companies, a lot of times, early stage founders, if you have a single founder, I'm always like, hey, if you don't have a CTO, you need a CTO. You're not going to get funded without one with this idea. Or if you're a CTO, you probably need to go find someone that's a little bit more savvy on business to help you. But you can't say, hey, this is my idea, I'm going to keep 92%. You get 8 because on the weekends and whatnot, you run out of capital. Those people need to have blood, sweat, and tears and be working with you and be a part of it. So how do you actually structure it when you say, hey, this company at the Series A level, we're going to spin this thing out, we're going to bring in a new team. Like, what does that structure look like?
There's good norms that we can basically point to, right? So as an example, generally, management teams are going to get between, on the low end, probably 10% of the equity pool. On the high end, probably 20 to 25%. It really depends on the circumstance and how early stage they're coming in. At the end of the day, for a founder to end up with between 7 and 15% of the company is really amazing. Right. That's really amazing. And so we try to get our founders, if we consider them, if they came in early enough as CEOs, we kind of make them co-founders effectively. We say, look, we'd like you to be able to get in this range. At the very least, you're going to be in the 5 to 6, 7% range. And then the management teams follow. And you can think of the CEO as approximately 1/3 of the equity pool, generally.
Yeah.
Right? So there's sort of like standard metrics that we can use and apply to this that really help. We tend to lead all the seed rounds, and then also we participate in the Series A. Usually the Series A is when we're bringing our first third-party money in, right? And, seed rounds can be huge. One of the companies we did was $19 million in seed. So that's not a small amount, right? That's a huge amount. And it just depends on the market size we're going after, what we want to achieve. And we bring in the team at different stages. Usually we bring them on almost like having an operating partner. So the CEO comes on earlier to our parent company level as like an operating partner, and then he slots in to the role. We've been very lucky that we haven't had to change too many of our operating CEOs because we go through this process, we know them well, we know we can trust them, we know that they share this same mentality of not being a self-saboteur, right, which is a critical thing, and then we go for it. And when we fail, we fail. When we fail, it's great because there's no such thing as failing. It's just, that didn't work, so let's learn from it and move on. And then we figure it out. And every time we adapt, and very seldomly the product that we had originally envisioned is what our final product is. Because it has to go through this Darwinian cycle to basically find its product market fit. And once we have that product market fit really clearly identified, that's when we start really ramping up. And we do kind of I would say there's 3 stages of seed, right? We do all 3 stages of seed. And they're increasing valuations as well. But that's about the time when we start thinking about, okay, we're going to do our first Series A with the outside investor that we partner with. That's about the time we want to bring that incremental sort of sophistication to the table.
You brought up a good point there about equity and early stage founders, and by the time things go public, 7 to 15%. I think a lot of people would say that, man, I built this whole company and this is kind of where it ended, because they think about, hey, like a Zuckerberg, right? And they're like, that is such an anomaly.
Well, he ended up, I think he had 15% as of a few years ago.
Yeah, but I mean, when they were out there public, he still had the voting power and the governance power.
Well, yeah, it's a little different situation because and what he's referring to is what you can set up is you can set up special voting shares that have, in some cases, right, special voting shares can have 10 times as much voting power as a standard share. So you can have like a common A and a common B. I mean, like literally teach a whole class on this. It's
Right.
like a whole thing. But I think one of the worst things to happen to venture investing is preferred stock approaches. Wherever we can, we try to make it all common. You put everybody on the same page. That way you don't have this misalignment of interest. And then everyone's spending so much time and energy trying to, engage in fuckery. And that does happen.
That's another great one.
That's another one, right?
Yeah.
People engage in this stuff and you sort of miss out. The companies exist for the customer. And I can't emphasize that enough. You have to identify what is the clear benefit to your customer and what is the value of that benefit. It sounds like motherhood and apple pie type stuff, but so few companies actually succinctly nail down what it is they want to provide as value to their customer. And I believe that constituencies, as companies get older, the big challenge we face and what's so wrong with our capitalistic model right now is not capitalism. I think capitalism's fine. It's good. That's what I spoke about at UN recently. I believe the problem is related to our absolute maniacal focus on earnings per share growth. Once companies become public, they become so focused on earnings per share growth that the quality of the product ends up degrading because that's the only thing you can count on. You can't keep counting on revenue growth, so let's cut the cost or try to create a monopoly like Gillette has, right? Have you noticed how expensive everything got? And with like razors and everything,
Yeah.
It was out of control, right? And then all these other small upstarts came in, like $1 Million, and all these other companies came in, and now they're sort of eating their lunch and they're bringing down, equilibrating their prices. So how in the heck is Gillette going to stay on top with earnings per share growth? How does Pfizer top last year's $47 billion in revenue from the COVID vaccine?
There's an issue there. Yeah, I'm in like the bottom 1% of beard growers, so I don't have that same issue.
Yeah,
but,
I'm with you, dude. So,
but I will say how much capitalism is too much capitalism in a way where when you think about, Boeing and McDonald, like it was at McDougall Douglas? Or
McDonnell Douglas.
McDonnell Douglas, right. And so...
Although we could really make a cool meme on McDougall Douglas. Yeah.
So when I think about how much capitalism is, too much capitalism there, the merger happened, right? In I think it was like the late 80s. And suddenly it was, the Boeing CEO was like the president and McDonnell Douglas CEO became the CEO. And suddenly it was like a race to zero, right? Like,
well, it's like AOL Time Warner is a good example.
but Boeing
too.
was this amazing company, people wearing shirts, people love Boeing. It's like you have all this pride. And this other CEO kind of came in and was like cutting everything at the knees as far as quality control went. And sure, it took a little bit of time, but, it was kind of, was that the early thread to a 737 MAX incident, right? And so how do we, and I think that this is some of the promise of Web3 here is there a different way where you can sustain kind of this community network effect growth because now market size is not just, hey, I'm Uber and I'm going to launch in San Francisco in this 7x7 area, and then I have to go to Austin, then I have to go to New York, and the whole cab business is $10 billion. If you launch in an international market with a piece of software, you suddenly have 1 billion people out there that have access to it. But maybe just like I think we're on the same thread here with capitalism. How much is too much, and is there an answer here?
Well, I think our focus is too short term, and that's the problem with earnings per share, right? Because everything is about comps. It doesn't matter how much profit you have. What matters to your stock price is how much you have this year compared to last year, and that becomes this terrible thing because how in the heck do you have any long-term decisions when the only way to count on that earnings per share growth? I mean, if you've noticed right now, Pfizer is running ads on TV like crazy. It's like every time I turn on my TV, there's an ad for Pfizer. You know why that is? Because it's the easiest discretionary spending that they can turn on to mitigate or reduce their level of profits.
Right.
And they don't want to have more difficult comps next year. But then this is also what leads to, oh, wait, we're going to launch another vaccine booster that then ultimately just gets tested and was no more effective at preventing, contraction of the contagion. And it just hit the media just this week, right?
It's brand awareness that isn't actually having an acquisition cost to it.
Yeah, no, that's the thing, because everybody looks at acquisitions, and I used to laugh about this when I worked at Allergan, right? We'd look at acquisitions. I led a $3.5 billion acquisition, which was successful because we didn't fire all the people. and we had organic growth. We went from, our Botox franchise at the time we made the acquisition was about $400 million. And then we acquired this company called Inamed up in Santa Barbara for $3.5 billion. And then within, 5 years, that business together was worth probably $40 billion. So what did we do? Well, we grew organically from 500 million, and the combined entities actually would have had that, about 500 million, because the other products weren't launched yet in this Inamed company. One of them was Juvederm. And what we were able to do is see that organic growth go all the way to $2.5 billion in 5 years during the Great Recession. And it was all organic. So we didn't have any acquisition, because I don't believe in these fake synergies, right, of like cutting people. I just don't believe in that. But the thing is that we need to start to go towards a paradigm that's more about asset management. I think this is going to change and have to require us to look differently at how we value companies. Maybe when someone invests in a company, there should be a longer minimum hold period, right? I don't know. Because I think all of this sort of like insider trading stuff is all because people are flipping and getting in and out of companies, not really investing for anything other than the speculation. So in my mind, I look at actually blockchain as a possible answer to this problem. Because now you don't have to come up with this, okay, what's more important, my customer or my employee? Or is it my shareholders, which ultimately the CEOs get fired by shareholders, so therefore it's shareholder. Let's be real. And the average tenure for a CEO is 18 months. So of course they're stuck on earnings per share.
Right.
He's just trying to figure out, how do I get the best
incentives.
package from my board, right? Because I'm going to be out of here in 2 years, right? So what the hell?
Yeah, we just saw that with Twitter.
So how do you manage that? I think blockchain solves that problem. Because for the first time, my customer, if I have a software utility as a product, like Crown Sterling has, my customer is also my investor, is also, my constituency, they're my community. It's all a virtuous cycle. I don't have to come up and say, oh, it's customer above one other thing, because my customer is all those things.
Right.
And that, I think, is a new paradigm that changes it to an asset value appreciation rather than an earnings per share growth model. And that's fundamentally the problem with how I believe we're looking at capitalism that makes it parasitic today.
Appreciate that, yeah. And so I'm getting phone calls and I'm getting waves telling us that I think it's time. But so I'm going to steal this from Tim Ferriss. I'm going to adapt it a little bit. If you can send a push notification to every phone on Earth with one sentence, what would it say?
A push notification. I would say get rid of all of your self-negative narratives that you have in your head and change your life. Be the change you want to see in the world.
Amazing. Robert Grant, everyone. Crown Sterling, thank you. Okay. That was very